Hello and welcome to Higher Results, where business, workforce, and talent intersect. We're going to do a couple of quick snippets on working remotely, which is going global. According to a survey by PGI, 79% of knowledge workers now work remotely. In addition to that, this is really important, 60% of those knowledge workers, if they could, would work full-time remotely for the same pay. So guess what? It's going to become a job differentiator. And with that, we have our remote working expert with us. This is Trina Hoefling with the Smart Workplace. Well, Trina, we're going to just jump in super fast.
Sounds good.
Share with us, I'm considering setting up, let's get tactical here, and operational. I want to set up some remote working for my workforce. What are some of the things as a manager that I should be doing fresh out of the gate? How do I do this?
As a manager,
Yeah.
first thing is find out whether or not it's already happening at the company. Either yourself or bring someone like the Smart Workplace in to do just a virtual workplace readiness. Find out where your manager's competencies are, your competencies as the manager. We have some free assessments on our website that help you do that just to get started, because the communication and the processes change.
So what are some of the key competencies that I should have to manage remote workers?
You got to be able to use the tools. Most collaboration tools, companies are spending bajillions of dollars on collaboration tools and the technology to integrate right now, but they're failing to teach you and me how to use them well. And so we're using them as personal organizational tools, and email continues on as it always has been without really leveraging the collaboration capabilities, and that's huge.
It is. And by the way, when we talk about a setup, so can you manage remote workers, but on top of your setup, do you have the right tools? Do they have computers? Do they have internet? What are the tools that they need? What's your collaboration tool? There's a difference in what you can and cannot provide if this worker is a 1099 or a W-2 worker in the United States, so if they're an employee. And the other thing is, if you're going to go down this path, make sure that your employee manual is set up to support it and put parameters around remote workers, because guess what? You have liability. If all of a sudden one of your workers is W-2 and there's an accident at home, you have liability. So pay attention to those details. Now, what else should a manager do really quickly to get themselves set up for remote working?
Well, and continue to think through those policies, because if the policies are in place, then the procedures can fall out of that. Also, bring the team together. Many times you've been co-located, or maybe you've had one or two people contracted in, and you're now moving into more of a full remote workforce. You really need to get the team together, preferably face-to-face, because face-to-face is still part of remote work, and get them to agree on how we're going to communicate, how we're going to communicate with our stakeholders, how we're going to stay connected with the processes, what in our workflows need to change so that we all stay fully informed, fully engaged, and fully, hopefully, working integrally. If you're doing parallel processing, it's a little bit easier. But if you have a complex work where it takes the team to create the finished product, which is most organizations, especially information workers today, you really need to make sure everybody's on the same page when they're not in the same place. And have frequent check-ins too, like at least weekly check-ins, have weekly stand-ups, possibly daily, depending on the stage of the project. And never think that you have to give up face-to-face gatherings because you're moving remote. You want to move to more of a blended mode.
To blend it. Make sure that you're getting that time to be together in person and separately. Now, here's one of the things about managing remote workers. You have to have more discipline in the process.
Yes.
And what that means is you have to have the tools where you can track the deliverables. What are you assigning? How is that remote worker staying on top of that work and telling you that they can get it done? So you manage differently. And I actually want to tell you, your ability to do things in a very reactionary way goes down. You have to plan, so you have to know what you're looking for in a delivery. And in fact, I actually think having remote workers makes you a better leader.
Well, it makes you a better leader, or your poor leadership skills show up more obviously. More structure and planning is required, because the clarity has to be there up front. The team agreements, the clarity, the work scope, the accountability factors. And at the same time, less structure and planning is required, because you can't control what people are doing in another place, and you can't spend your time worrying about what they're doing in another place. So building the trust happens through structuring the agreements until genuine trust really develops. And that's an important part too, to realize it's a transition. You start with Swift Trust, but you don't assume things are going well without the accountability factors in place, which is just good management.
Let me give you a couple of quick highlights that are really important here. You're taking on remote workers. Pay attention to, do you have company policies? Have you set up solid procedures for communication? Are you differentiating between your 1099 and your W-2? Do you know what tools are needed? Do they have the appropriate tools? Do you have the appropriate insurance? Now, when you set this into motion, pay attention to the deliverables and how you track those deliverables, and then stay in touch with your workers. It's really important. You can't swing by. You don't have the water cooler conversations. As Trina said, make sure that you've got regular touch points with them. And your competencies as a leader matter. You can go to the Smart Workplace on their website. They do have tools for you in getting prepared. They also have tools for you to check competencies for being a manager. Trina and I met years ago, and she wrote this fantastic book called Working Virtually. And we're going to dive into, I want to be a remote worker. What does that mean for me and my career? And I'm going to start off with one thing very quickly. You can be a remote worker in 1099, have your own business, so you're a contract worker, or you can be a remote worker, W-2. So I want to work remotely. What does that mean for me as a worker, Trina?
Well, it means you need to be assertive, for one thing, and you have to decide that's an important thing for you, for workplace flexibility, family care, whatever the reason happens to be, or just that you work better in a different environment. Many companies are moving to this, so it's a little easier to build and present your business case for why you want to be a remote worker. It's harder to say no these days because there are really no barriers in place other than mindsets. So that's the good news. The way to go about this is really know your culture, know your manager, and know the policies of your company, and then come back with a rationale. What's the reason why you want to do this? Now, a lot of times companies are driving and asking you to go remote, so you don't even have to build a business case even more. But in a lot of the clients that I'm working with, there's still a little hesitancy, a little bit of concern, not sure it really quite works. So build your case. Best thing you can do is just to be fully competent and always deliver on time with results,
Yes.
sometimes exceeding them if you possibly can, because those who are trusted are the ones that are most easily able to get that pioneering out
Position.
there. And,
You betcha.
yeah.
You know what that makes me think of, though? A couple of things, and I've seen this happen with remote workers. You need clarity on what are the expectations. Expectations always matter. What are the hours of work?
Right.
So if you're going to work remotely, are you adhering to a normal 8 to 5 schedule? Are you adhering to a delivery schedule?
Right.
Should you be available from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m.? 6 p.m. to 3 a.m.
Definitely.
Really
Definitely.
a long day. So what are the hours that you should be working? And then how do you report on your deliverables or your progress? Sometimes you may have a project that's going on for a whole month. Your boss needs to hear from you regularly. So you need to check it up, have some milestones, show that you have delivery, but get your expectations down pat, right?
Right.
The other one that comes to mind for me is if you are a W-2 worker, make sure if this is HR that you know your company's policies.
Right.
Because, believe it or not, your company is liable when you are working from home. If there's an accident, just like if you had an accident at work, within your workspace, the company would be liable. And that's why we have insurance, general liability, why we have our workers' comp, etc. And most companies in their employee manuals, we actually state firm policies around who you can have in your work environment. Same thing if you're at work, treat your virtual
Child
work
care,
environment.
elder care.
You know what? You can't have people over and be accountable. Things that you can't do. If you can't drink at work, guess what? You can't drink in your office when you're working from home. All of the same policies apply if you're a W-2 worker, right? What other things do you think our remote workers should be considering?
Well, I think regardless of whether or not you think yourself as a small office, home office, self-employed person or a full-time employee, think of yourself as managing your own career to step up to a higher level of self-leadership, self-promotion, and self-development. Corporations, the trends in supporting training are going down, and more people are short timers, whether they're employees or not, and so companies are just not investing in us the way they used to. So we, as professionals, need to step up and take responsibility for finding our own professional development, finding our own communities of practice, making sure we're at the top of our game, and we're promoting our successes. Now, in terms of some of the other things you've mentioned, it's really not that much different. Whether you're co-located or remote, you need to deliver on your results and make sure people can see those results. It's communicating up front. Some managers are better virtual managers than others. And so if you have one of those managers that's a little hands-off, tends to go to the convenient person who's right next door, that's when being assertive, stepping forward, kind of bragging on yourself. Humble brags are always a good thing, as long as it's not done in a way that you're saying, hey, look at me, look at me. You don't want to be that obvious, but you need to be clear and promote yourself as a professional. I also think the third piece that I would add is it's really more important than ever to build your professional network inside your organization with other stakeholders and beyond the organization, because your network is how you're going to get your next job, whether it's inside the company, another project, or moving on and adding other organizations to your client list.
Awesome. By the way, one of the things that Trina's bringing up that's really important is communications. Mm-hmm. It matters. So if you have a boss that maybe isn't as proactive in their communication, be the proactive one. Ask for a weekly check-in. Make sure that you are setting milestones. Right. Make sure that you are connecting with others, whether you're on chat or sending emails. Right. And don't forget, here's one of the things that happens too often with remote workers. They forget to ask for help.
Right.
You know, it's one thing for me to walk down the aisle at the office and lean in and say, hey, Trina, can you help me? Well, guess what? You can do that online. You have to do that and pick up the phone sometimes. You don't have the same water cooler conversations. So pick up the phone and get to know your colleagues.
Yeah.
Have a little water cooler conversation, and that's important. It's not just about getting things done. Pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you? What'd you do this weekend? Create relationships throughout. Are there any other tidbits that you would tell our workers?
Well, I want to say one more thing about the asking for help. In writing the second edition of Working Virtually, which came out last year, I found an interesting fact that we as human beings care about and connect and bond more with people who we help or who help us.
That's so true.
And so helpfulness is not just the cool thing to do, it's the right thing to do to really build strong, trusting relationships. So ask for help. I know that I've been doing this now for well over 30 years remotely. And I still sometimes stop and think, oh, I should know how to do this by myself. I shouldn't have to reach out to so-and-so about this. Reach out. It breaks down that barrier and bridges for virtual distance, which is isolation and loneliness is probably the biggest risk to working virtually.
It is. It's a huge risk.
Yeah.
So with that, you can have a very successful career working virtually. Here's a couple of tidbits. And if you have the time, I would really recommend that you read Working Virtually. There's a lot of good insights in there. So thanks for being with us today, and we'll see you online.